Welcome to the Liberty Insider. This is a program bringing you news, views, discussion and insights into religious liberty events in the US and around the world. My name is Lincoln Steed, editor of Liberty magazine, and my guest is Ed Cook, Dr. Ed Cook. As I've introduced you before, author, pastor, public speaker, religious liberty activist, yes. And your doctorate is in church-state studies, so very qualified. I understand that not too long ago you went to India.
Yes.
And made some discoveries. Tell me about India and religious liberty.
Well, the country, you know, I mean, as far as the time I spent there, I landed in Mumbai.
By the way, many people in India watch this program. We, at our recent General Conference session, what was it, 2 years ago now, I was a couple of times waiting in line, and people from India called out, and one of the leaders said, "Oh, people watch it a lot in India, so we've got to be careful what we say."
Sure. Everything I've got to say, I think, is going to be on a positive note.
Well, there's some negatives on religious liberty, but
sure.
Wonderful people.
Yes, and I enjoyed, you know, from a kind of beginning point, enjoyed my travel throughout the country and had a chance to visit about 5 of their main cities, and even had time to go out and see the Taj Mahal and historical sites that way.
I don't know if it's a crime, maybe it is, but at one stage I had a little piece about half an inch square of the Taj Mahal. When I went there as a teenager, I pried it out of the wall. Probably lucky I got out of the country.
Yeah, because that is one of their historical monuments.
Beautiful monument. It's one of the wonders of the world, really.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So my time in the country visiting and everything was fabulous. I enjoyed it very much, and the people were very cordial, always willing to help out and service-oriented. The couple of things, though, that I noticed as I was traveling in the country, and this is not just from a particular denominational perspective, it's just interacting with people in the particular cities I visited, some that happened to be Hindu, some that were Seventh-day Adventists, some that were Christian but non-Seventh-day Adventists.
And Christians, of course, are a very small minority.
Only about 2% of total Indian population. The Indian population is a little over 1 billion is their current statistics, and of course very I would say pluralistic in the sense of diverse, because they've got a variety of dialects that they speak, as well as cultural perspectives, south compared to north.
And Hinduism, of course, has so many gods that they're not really too particular.
Except if it's non-Hindu. That's
well, never used to be, but Hinduism and Indian nationalism have sort of joined at the hip in recent years.
That's correct. And that's where that Hindu nationalist movement is something that has become a more prevalent part of politics and national politics in India. And as I kind of learned from dialoguing with citizens there, is that particular states like in the central and northern part of India tend to, in the past, tended to be the Central Democratic Party, but more of the Hindu nationalist movement. They've done a lot of groundwork and laid a good foundation where they've gotten some of those states to convert over to Hindu nationalist parties. And of course, at the state level, when you get enough states combined together, that makes an impact on the national level.
And something I'm sure you noticed, and I saw it from visiting there, but you don't get it internationally. You know, India, one country, and you think one people. But it's no more one people than Latin America, South America, big continent. There's many different ethnic groups, and India is the same. And it's an amazing miracle, I think, of the modern world that a coherent, cohesive, and enduring state could be established. And especially the partition was violent because Pakistan left and formed an Islamic state or a Muslim state. But still, India's an amazingly successful country, even though on a certain level it's dysfunctional.
Yes, true.
Because it's so big and unwieldy, and some little remainders of the English British Raj, some of the same steam trains and that, but India's moving ahead rapidly and far more advanced in some areas than people imagine. They've got their own Silicon Valley and their own film industry that's, I think, bigger than Hollywood in reality.
Yep. In fact, commenting on that, I was just going to note that the individuals that have taken time just looking at trends, they project that India is actually going to, because of its technology base, is actually going to supersede in certain areas of technology even that of the United States.
Yes.
And that's where, you know, it's just their prime, at their prime for development and becoming a more developed country.
The problem with India that I see, they don't have a surplus of natural resources other than people, and they're very energetic people. But yes, India and China too, these are hugely emerging economies that I think in the West we're not always aware of them.
Yes, that is true.
And so you probably got a little window into that. But as far as missionary activity and of course the larger religious liberty thing, I'm sure you've picked up the tensions.
Oh, yes.
And a lot of it is related to caste, isn't it? The caste system.
Yeah, because in traditional Hindu religious beliefs, you've got your caste system. And of course, Christianity does not support or teach the idea of caste and different levels of importance or value to individuals. Which is
tied up to the reincarnation and the levels you come back and you know, you might be the lower caste now, but maybe you get a later chance. You can elevate yourself. But what with education in India, and people have seen what it's like in other countries, the lower castes have become aware that they're just sort of fixed in place in their country. There's not much mobility.
Well, you know, another thing though that has influenced the changing viewpoint within Indian culture, especially in the South, is due to the influence of democracy. Where, you know, like you mentioned, people can easily access the internet. They see how democracy works in other countries like America and Western countries, and they start recognizing that there is an element of human rights. And so individuals, even though they're at the lower caste level, they may say, well, you know, society may have placed me here, but on my own initiative, I'll seek some way to come out of that caste level and recognize that I'm an individual just as others that might be in a higher caste level. And that does produce some tensions with the traditional Hindu viewpoint of the ordering of society and individuals that want more free-flowing democracy.
Now, the Indian government, from all that I can see, is quite a secular, egalitarian system. It's not insisting on the caste system, but the caste system in society is pretty inflexible. But by the same token, I know that some untouchables have become millionaires. They're not all desperately poor, but they're still held in place by society's expectations. And did you see signs of people becoming Christian partly to escape the caste system?
You know, as far as finding out what the motives might have been behind individuals making that choice, I never really had a chance to dialogue.
I used the word partly, and I should have emphasized that. I mean, you hope that it, as always, with any religious conversion and change, that it's a deeply felt, life-changing experience.
Sure.
But it's not a negative at all when Christians witness to the lower caste that they see in accepting Christ. They're also escaping you know, the inhibitions their society have placed on them.
I think that, you know, maybe one of the most attractive things of Christianity in India is just the idea that if an individual accepts Christ and becomes part of that community, they're accepted equally among the body of believers. So, you know, somebody that maybe in regular Indian society has felt ostracized or prohibited of certain things, they come into a community and they're accepted. And so naturally that's an attractive element. And I think that that's one of the reasons why your traditional Hindu religion and those that are adherents of it, devout adherents, devout Hindus, they take resentment towards that because they can't offer that within their religion.
And did you see anything? I think I privately told you that India had a great effect on me. I was only a teenager when I first went there. And
didn't you tell me your dad also served there for some time?
Visited there many times. He knew Mrs. Gandhi very well, visited with her many times. And Desai even had him come visit our headquarters office in Washington, D.C. And I'm trying to think of the state that he spent a lot of time in. But oh no, India was very close to my father's heart. And but when I went to India, and the first time Dad took us there, it was shocking culturally. I mean, so many people. it makes you re-examine, at least made me look closely at what's a human being even. The anonymity, it reminds me of, it was like a movie I saw years ago, a kid's movie, Ants, and the Woody Allen ant character is in a couch being psychoanalyzed, and in the background you see the ants by the tens of thousands doing this and that and the other. And he says, and I feel so insignificant, doctor. He says, oh, you know, I'm the middle child of 10,000 or whatever. And at the end, the psychiatrist says, we've made great progress today. He says, you are insignificant. But of course, under Christ, under Creator God, we all have value. But there's so many people that it can question that. Because in the West, we have a sense of individual autonomy. That's harder to maintain in a country like India. And of course, Asia in general is a challenge to that. But it affected me too, because I saw our church, which was very small relative to the overall population, but fairly active. But it was suffering because there were not enough church workers, pastors and administrators. And what was happening is that many of them that converted to Adventism, Christianity, they saw possibilities in Loma Linda, California, universities in the US, and came here and never went back. And I determined that I would go back and help Australia, that I owed it to my country, and I did, went back for 9 years, which I think is consistent with Paul and the missionary journeys and Silas and Timothy and all of that. We have to have a sense of, it's fine to go to the pagan, go to the far lands, but you've got to take care of your own culture first.
Sure, yep.
But did you see any signs of religious tensions when you were there?
You know, as far as one of the particular cities that I did visit, they had a roughly 40% of the population that were Muslim, and then the other roughly 45 to 50% that were Hindu, and then just a small minority portion that were Christian. But talking to some of the people that lived there, they did tell me that it's not so much that they had any resentment towards the Muslims for being Muslims. It's just that the Muslims, with their prayer practice 5 times a day, there were times that in the downtown part of that city, all the streets would be blocked off because the people overflowed the mosque out into the street, and traffic came to a standstill. And so it just made it a little more difficult with day-to-day living arrangements, and especially with commute times and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and all around the world, even in the some of the worst offending Muslim countries, the ruling class and the more educated people usually are able to live and let live and have a certain accommodation. But you get down to a basic village level where people are not well educated, hardscrabble living, and only a few dollars a year or a month sometimes. And tensions can get out of hand much more easily. In India,
commenting on that, of course, actually, there was commenting on that very point. In more of the kind of, you might say, rural or village areas where, as you pointed out, sometimes people don't have the opportunity to be as educated about other differing viewpoints and other, practices, religious practices and so forth, and accepting of others. In some of those places, there have been instances where ministers, especially Pentecostal pastors, have gone in and holding revival services and claiming to do miracles and so forth, where the villagers have become incited, devout Hindus incited against them, and violence has broken out, where some of them have lost their lives. The Christians have lost their lives. It's regrettable,
and often it's just, well, like in Acts of the Apostles, there's a case where, the charge was made, remember, by the possessed girl, these men are teaching whatever. There's a
and the people were afraid that their temple to the goddess Diana was going to be shut down. Yep.
We'll be back after a short break. Please stay with us. Talking at the moment about India, but we may take it further afield. We'll be back. Welcome back to the Liberty Insider. Before the break, with guest Ed Cook, talking about some of your experiences in India and what you saw and what's going on there on religious liberty and religious activity. It's still a great mission field for Christian witness, and on religious liberty in general, there's a great need to, maybe placate's the wrong word, but placate some of the antagonisms that rise up from time to time, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, and so on.
And I was going to mention that you know, the Indian Constitution, as it is currently formulated, it does give the right for individuals to change faith and, in essence, learn of another faith. It doesn't outright guarantee the idea of proselytism if it's under coercion. That's a very plainly.
Well, through that whole part of the world, they're very sensitive about coercive conversions, and, or a way we used to put it, rice Christianity.
Yes.
Inducements. It's
correct.
Coercion might be the wrong word. They don't want inducements that entice people away from traditional faith.
Correct. And so, having stated that, that's the current Indian Constitution that does guarantee the idea or the concept of religious freedom. At the same time, there has been recent discussion and debate and dialogue at levels of Congress dealing with changing that, in essence, removing that provision. Of course, if that were to happen, then in essence, it would recognize Hinduism as the national religion. So that's something that obviously I'm sure people living in India have concern of, and even people that are outside of India, other countries recognizing issues
and the
of that
dynamic
type.
is probably pushing them toward recognizing Hinduism as synonymous with being Indian. Because even though Pakistan is a separate country, there's issues. Not that many years ago, was it in Mumbai, where they had the Islamic terrorist attacks on some hotels?
Yes.
Remember that? So that sort of exposed the rift more than the wars between, in my view, than the wars between India and Pakistan and Bangladesh.
But one of the other thing I was going to comment on as well, kind of the underlying concern for those that would be desirous of keeping Hindu as the national religion or making it the national religion, is that if Christianity or other religious groups come into the country, are allowed in, and do proselytizing efforts to such an extent that they get more adherents, that eventually the country becomes that particular faith. And the reason I bring that up is that when we look at American history, there was a point when Protestants in America were concerned about the influx of Catholic immigrants, and kind of there was an anti-Catholic push.
Well, for the same reason, and,
yes.
and I haven't mentioned it with you, but I nearly always, when this sort of thing comes up, mention the Ku Klux Klan in the US. You know, they should live in infamy, but people have forgotten their broader push, which was a white Anglo-Saxon Christian America. So they were opposed to Catholicism.
Yes.
And it was no less, was just as reprehensible what they did against Catholics as against blacks and Jews and so on. They were equal opportunity bigots. Yeah. But it derived from the same sensibility, to keep it Protestant.
Correct.
And, much as you and I might be in favor of the Protestant Reformation, I don't think anyone could endorse that sort of a way of maintaining it.
But, that's why I think that not only India, but other countries around the world, that if they would take time to study a little bit more of American history and how we have not only faced some challenges of that type, but managed to navigate our way through them and still maintaining a peaceful society that is diverse with its religious adherence, that might be something where countries like India and other countries could learn from.
Yeah, I think it's a combination in the US of good laws, a good constitution, and increasing education and an openness. You know, the worst places in the US are sort of the dark corners of the Deep South, and things linger there. and talking internationally, there's some problems, I think, internationally with religious liberty and religious freedom with Saudi Arabia, for example. And neither the US nor the United Nations can force them to be tolerant. But what I think can be, quote, forced, or at least promoted and pushed, is openness. And in the modern world, if you have interchange of people, tourists and others, and outside workers that can freely travel, because in Saudi Arabia they're kept in compounds mostly, I think that would partly self-correct. It's the closed countries that have the most problems with religious persecution and harassment and so on.
Yep. One might even say that the closed concept, physically, literally, is something that is a reflection of a closed mentality.
Right, and also, if you think about it in view of protecting the national faith and so on, it's a sense of fear and vulnerability.
And that's one of the reasons why, in the American context, the Founding Fathers, in essence, argued that if a religion needs government to support it, like through laws,
it's not a good religion.
It's not a good religion,
right?
Because it can't stand on its own.
Or they put it the other way around. A true religion doesn't need the support
Correct.
of government.
Yep.
And I think that's been proven. But you and I can easily prove that from the Bible. Biblically, spiritually, that's the way it should be. Dealing with hearts, not coercion.
But you know, there's another element that is related to the aspect of religious freedom in countries around the world, that we have plenty of historical examples that whenever there is a dominant religion that gains civil authority or political power and begins to persecute or ostracize those that are not of that dominant religion, then there is some kind of an economic impact in that society. Like, when the Protestants were there in France and they were forced to flee, the Huguenots, there were many of them that were artisans, and many studies have been done showing
their business class too.
Their economy went down. France suffered economically for doing that.
Yeah. I'm trying to resist belaboring the persecution and religious problems in many Muslim countries. That's an article or a program all to itself. But something that we need to remark on here, because it's been in the headlines over and over again, is in Myanmar, again a closed country to still somewhat, but opening up a little bit, very much a closed country for a long time. And it's becoming obvious to the outside world that there's a huge problem in Myanmar with the Rohingya. You've been reading about that? You're aware of that?
A little bit, yes.
They're a Muslim population who are ethnically different from most of the, what we used to call Burmese in Myanmar, because they come from Bangladesh. But when they came, no one knows. Certainly not much within living memory. A generation or two ago, they crossed the border. They count themselves as Myanmarese. I don't know if there's such a word. But the military government has acted on the fears of the Buddhist majority, and they've been persecuting them in a very bloody manner, sometimes liquidating whole villages, killing a few and forcing the rest of them across the border. And they're the ultimate dispossessed people. They're not given citizenship rights, they're not provided education typically, no political involvement, basically no civil liberties. It's a very egregious situation that correctly is troubling the whole world at the moment, and particularly so since the woman who now is basically the head of state, Aung San Suu Kyi, a very progressive, we thought, British educated woman, has seemed to be determined to turn a blind eye to this, and even the little statements she's made have been very forgiving of what the military is doing, and saying, well, they asked for it, they've reacted, and we're just punishing the dissidents.
But you know, what was surprising to me is that that something like that would occur in a society that was predominantly Buddhist, because I mean, historically, you don't typically.
It's not been a violent. It's been a very passive
religion,
indifferent religion to others. It's a meditative religion. But yes, in a number of places, Buddhism has become aggressive and even violent at times.
Which is unfortunate, due to their past history of not being that way.
I know. So something's going on, and I believe it's a sign of the end of time. The nation, what is it, from the Messiah? As we film this, the end of the year, the nations are angry. Why do the nations rage so angrily, violently together? Isn't it?
Yeah, sure.
There's an element of that. So we need to pray as Christians and people that are concerned about our fellow human beings that the Rohingya in Myanmar will be relieved and treated admirably. In India, I know you wish well there.
Yes, certainly.
And Christians throughout the Middle East, just as a little passing comment, a bad situation. What other area? Do you see another flashpoint or another area that in the world that we should be aware of where there's religious liberty challenges?
Yeah, I would kind of look at some of the areas that one would look at in the Middle East predominantly. Those are areas where Christians in the minority are facing persecution, laws that are against them that make it difficult for them to live their faith and share their faith. Even in portions of North Africa are facing similar situations. So we certainly need to pray for all of those communities.
Those that say that the world is increasingly secular and that religion is fading away really are ignoring a global situation where religion is dominant and aggressive and sometimes even violent in its conflicts between one religion and the other. India is a massive country with many religious viewpoints, all at close quarters. Years ago, I remember being impressed by reading Stanley Jones's seminal book, The Christ of the Indian Road, and having him report on a conversation with a Brahmin who said, I don't like the Christ of the European culture and all of the doctrines that you present and so on. And Stanley Jones says, but what about the Christ of the Indian Road? And the way he described him, he was someone that they could relate to. I know that in India, they can relate to Christ. I know that in the Middle East, where Christ came from, they can relate to him. We need religion. For Liberty Insider, this is Lincoln Steed.